How are y'all doing? So my mind's going blank right now, a lot of you out there. My name's Joe Lafiosca. I'm not going to go into who I am because I only have 10 minutes. So here we go. We're going to run through this really quickly. Third-party nightmares. So I'm a software developer. This is any one of us, right? Software developer, we have an idea. We want to make an app, a mobile app, for people to buy, sell, and trade lost pennies. And we're going to build it in React Native. So we know we're going to need some third-party libraries, right? But what is a third-party library? Let's get definitions straight first. So there are a lot of different contexts where we talk about third parties, but in this particular one, the first party would be us or our software. The second party is React Native, the main piece of software we're working with, and then the third party is anything else pretty much. If you're using a navigation library or authentication library, something that someone other than you and React Native have provided. And for context, this talk is React Native specific, but everything I'm going to say applies more generally. It's just that React Native has an especially unique state of a third-party library ecosystem, let's say. So, and that brings up the first major point, which is that context always matters. And I don't have enough time to get into all the details I want to get into about everything here, so bear with me. But if you want to follow up on anything, find me later and we can talk out the specific details of things. But context always matters, and there's a two-word phrase that I think you can use to answer pretty much any question in computing. It was told to me by a teacher of mine a long time ago, and it is, it depends. So this is not a comprehensive talk by any stretch. I cannot cover everything. But in our story, we're trying to build this app. Which libraries do we want to use? We'll just pick them as we go. We'll just look around and see what we need. So the first thing is we want to implement authentication for our app, logging in. And React Native has so many third-party libraries. It's unbelievable. And the popularity of different third-party libraries fluctuates over time. Sometimes one of them is really hot for a while, and then people get tired of it, and something else comes up and replaces it. Or sometimes there are multiple that are popular at the same time. If you go look on Google, you're going to find articles like the 41 best React Native libraries to go use in your next project. I don't think that they're intending for me to use all of them in my next project, but maybe, I don't know. There's 11 different component libraries and so on, right? So there's a lot of stuff out there. How do you dig through it? I don't know. That's not why I'm here. What I'm just going to tell you is that there's a lot of them there. But no, part of the point of this talk is to talk to you as a potential library developer, right? If you're putting software out there into the ecosystem, I have some tips for you, and one of them is delineate the purpose and problem that your library, the purpose of your library and the problem that it solves, right? Make it very clear. Give context for why I should use your library, and tell your story. Why did you make that library? And so in our app, we decided we're going to use a pretty popular authentication library, which also does a lot of other things, and it's called the Acme Widget System Library, let's call it. And it looks easy. We get authentication set up in our app. Next, we want to implement navigation. Okay. Well, again, React Native has a lot of third-party libraries, and the library ecosystem is somewhat messy in certain places. So it can be hard to tell what's even usable for our needs or not. It can be hard to tell which libraries are even being maintained anymore. And for context here, I suggest sometime, if you feel like it, search NPM for React Native scrollable tab view, and you'll find 93 different packages. And it's not even clear which ones are functional or not. A lot of them have the same README from the original one that they forked it from. It's just not really obvious what's going on. This is obviously not the whole list either. So as a library developer, give a clear value proposition for your library. Like state why I should use it, and list any known limitations. Because I know when you're developing a library, you know you're not going to solve every problem. So list the known limitations up front, and then let me see that in the README. Another tip, stand out with quality. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff where it's hard to even tell one from another. If you put effort into your library, it stands out and you become one of the more popular ones. And like just one very small example there is consider offering first-class TypeScript support, for instance. Like there's a large portion of our community who prefer things that are easy to use for what they want to use, and a lot of us are using TypeScript, so think about it. So we're going to pick our navigation library for our application arbitrarily based on the one that looks easy to us, and we move on. We implement some kind of navigation framework. Next, we want to implement push notifications, and this is not fun. It's just not, sorry, and cross-platform and all that. So turns out, though, that the Acme widget system, which we used to implement authentication, also supports push. It's a little more complex than authentication, though, and we need some help. And how are we going to get that help? I don't know. Because there are too many avenues for support when it comes to our third-party libraries, and different ones tell you different ways to get that support. It depends on the project, and sometimes none of them end up helping you, and you end up having to do it yourself. When you do that, it's you know, you're often digging into someone else's code. You might not understand it. You might not have context for it. And so a tip to you as a library developer, consider integrating logging into your library. Make it easy for the DIY developer to hook into your logging for debugging. And in our story, again, after a couple of weeks of effort, we finally managed to get push notifications sort of working, close enough, with one catch. We find there's an annoyance in the library, and it looks like there's a very small, obvious fix that we think will contribute. So we submit a pull request to Acme, and we think, okay, we'll just get that in there, and when they accept it, we'll just update to the newest version. So the thing is, though, any time that we spend volunteering our code and our issue writing is time that is not spent on our own project. So there's always a trade-off there. And consider that when you are a library maintainer, right? What helps the community grow, right? People want to feel included, they want to feel encouraged, they want to feel valued. So as a library maintainer, make it easy for people to contribute and provide clear steps to them. And consider non-code contribution, things like documentation or articles. What can everyone do to be involved? All right, so next we got to schedule a release party, even though we're nowhere near anywhere having a release on this app, but it's because we have pressure from our CEO, our partner. We got to have something rolling. We want people hyped about what we're building, and the CEO says so. So I'm going to schedule a release party, and the context to remember here is that business needs impact our decision making. It's just something we can't avoid. And the speed and urgency from those external pressures can mean cutting corners sometimes. So sometimes you want to decide, for instance, is it worth submitting a PR, or can we just do a workaround and leave a comment in our code and wait for, get back to it later, just incur some technical debt. And the major point here is that our resources are limited. We all have limited time, energy, and motivation. And as a library maintainer, consider your own level of commitment before you start. If you have a great idea for a library that you want to release, think to yourself, how am I going to handle community management, release management? What are my social skills like? Can my mental health afford this? There's a lot of hecklers out there in the third-party library ecosystem, by the way. And there can be, Twitter can be a very dangerous place, let's say. So next we want to implement media capture on our app, and we want people to be able to take pictures of pennies. Well, we're inexperienced with this, and there are multiple libraries with incomplete, overlapping, disparate feature sets. There's just things missing from each library, and you got to look at them and figure out, like, which of the bad options is best for you, or, do we roll our own? Do we want to write native code for this? If we don't have experience with it, that might not be a good idea. As a library maintainer, I suggest explain your code logic, especially if it involves native code setup. What is this code doing that I'm putting into my app, right? And consider the trade-offs of native versus pure JavaScript. Is the build complexity worth what you're getting out of it? So we run into some dead ends exploring the libraries, and we eventually get there, but it takes a lot of time. And then we get a response back from Acme on our pull request. They want us to update our PR and submit an additional documentation PR to their repos. Okay, well, responsibility ping pong is what I call that, right? Like, you're now switching context again. You got this notification from GitHub. Do you drop what you're doing on your own app and go back to working for this third-party library? Or do you just say, well, no, forget it? And the thing is, some people's first instinct, both on the maintainer side and the developer side, is no, you do it, right? Like, why should I do that effort? Well, this brings up the major point, the most major point, which is software is inherently social. And I do not have another 20 minutes to explain why that's true, but take my word for it and talk to me later. Software is inherently social. So think about how your users will feel about your library and about your responses, and respect their time and energy. And speaking of respecting your time, I have blown way through mine, so we're just going to really quickly say, we wanted to re-implement navigation on our app. We don't know what we don't know. We find out the navigation library has certain gaps that we weren't expecting. The maintainer of it says no new changes are accepted, but we can start our own fork. Well, guess what? If you expect people to be able to fork your library and make their own versions of it, maybe provide them steps, help them get there. And finally, we update the push notifications. Acme accepted our PRs, but there was a small breaking change because of how much time passed from the time we submitted it to the time that it was accepted. And as a library maintainer, again, consider how quickly do you accept simple PRs? How quickly do you accept complex ones? Do you trust people's code? Do you require them to pass reviews and tests? And how much of that can you automate? Or how much of that is, again, your time and effort? And how much else in your library is changing while you're accepting those PRs? Finally, we have the release party, minus the release, right? Because we're pretty far behind now. But that's just kind of how it's gone. So thank you very much. Sorry for running a little bit over. But thank you.